Arkadaşlar herkese merhaba. DevOps Türkiye'nin 9 Mart 2022 tarihindeki etkinliğine hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Burada bugünkü etkinliğimizde IBM'de DevOps olarak çalışan Marc ile ilgili DevOps boundary'leri konusunda konuşacağız ve Marc bize bu konu hakkında sunumunu hazırlayacak. Hazırlamış olduğu sunumunu daha doğrusu anlatacak. O şekilde ilerleyeceğiz. Ben şimdi sözü Marc'a ileteceğim. Yayınımız İngilizce olacak. Ona göre bilginiz olsun. Yayın sonunda da eğer herhangi bir sorunuz olursa bu soruları Marc'a iletip ona göre arada köprü vazifesi göreceğim. Sorularınızı Türkçe veya İngilizce de yazabilirsiniz. Bu tamamen size kalmış. Teşekkürler. Şimdiden iyi izlemeler, iyi yayınlar diliyorum. Hi, hello Marc, hello. Welcome our DevOps Turkey online event. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. Hello, everybody.
All right. Now I'm adding your presentation to the live stream and I'm removing myself. Have a nice.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about the boundaries of DevOps. I know that a lot of you people actually are much more into the technical than I am. I have a technical background, however, during my, let's say, life as a DevOps engineer, I learned quite a number of tricks and of the trade that have nothing to do with technicality. And that's something I want to share with you. So first things first, who am I? That's quite simple. My name is Marc. I have an engineering degree in electricity with a specialization in electronics. My first job was in a telephone company, and I created hardware for custom devices based on mini computers. These devices needed drivers, so I started writing software as well. That's how I got into development roles. I changed jobs and worked in a company where I was developing systems for car assembly steering and follow-up. It was bought by IBM, and then I became part of one of the projects at IBM CLS. It's the largest banking application in the world. And I joined the team working on the messaging layer. I've had many roles. I've been a team lead, an analyst, a test architect, a sysadmin, architect for DevOps, tester, you name it. I probably did it. I always had a preference for automation and was disappointed in Windows systems. So I found that Linux suited my preferences and needs far better. So I learned how to use that, and I've been using Linux and open source since '94. Nowadays, I'm the technical lead and architect at an infrastructure company that works for a bank. We work in server provisioning and preparing the servers for the applications of the bank. So today I want to introduce you to the site boundaries of DevOps. You all know CI/CD, pipelines, cloud orchestration, SRE, or many others, I presume. I'm here to touch upon lesser known terrain that is still going to be worthwhile. Enjoy the ride. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I have to warn you a little bit. I made my presentation actually on a Mac using the tools that are available there. And then I converted it to PowerPoint, but to my disappointment, it doesn't work out as well as I had hoped so. So at some points in the presentation, I will try to share my screen so that you have a better screenshot of what's happening there. Okay, onwards with the presentation. Good. Now, I'm hiring you, and you need to help set up a way to bring existing applications to the cloud. You'll be leading a team of 5 fine DevOps specialists, and you need to do it in 60 workdays. My question, can you do it? So, the correct answer there should, of course, be that depends. And it's my turn to say something again. So I'm asking you, on what does it depend? Can we use, and you insert your favorite tool, And of course, that there is no objection to that. Take your pick. But will it make a difference? Can we do it the agile way? Yes, of course. Let's do Scrum stand-ups, bring in some product owners, etc. If it helps, why not? Do we need to keep costs low? Well, there is no limitation on the budget, but procurement can be a bit slow, you know. So you have to take that into account. And then, do we have requirements? Yes, sure. You have requirements. It just needs to work as before. Does the customer have any experience in cloud applications? Limited, but other teams are working on cloud applications, so you can consult them, of course. And then the final one, do we have to do it alone? No, you don't have to do it alone. You need to cooperate with other teams. So now we're on something. So, which teams you should work with? Well, in effect, you probably need to talk to all of them to get a full picture. And then the next question is, okay, where should you start with moving the applications? I think understanding what users want is really key there. And your next question would be, what's affected by this project and who? What are the direct and indirect side effects? So this is mostly a mystery. Just to point out that this is, let's say, the scenario of a typical assignment that you might find in the DevOps world. And be aware that it's never a green field where you will be working. It's rarely or seldom that a project usually starts from scratch. Okay, now, so cooperation with others. Oh, sorry. In your team, as well as outside of your team, you need to take care that you work on a proper basis. Inevitably, you'll be talking to other people regarding this project, and sooner or later you notice that not everybody is on the same page. Managers might think other things than developers do, and testers still have an own opinion. So we all need to bring them, let's say, together on one page and have a common understanding, or a goal and a vision, and correlated views. That means talking, listening, discussing, explaining, and surely visualizing. Working with others can be challenging sometimes, so I'll give you a number of guidelines, tips, and tricks. Some are based on psychology, some on systems theory. Let's have a look. Okay, this is an awful slide because I created it using Key. So it's not really Apple tool, it's not PowerPoint. So I'll share with you the screen later on, but now. So lean principle 1 is define the customer value. That means you have to figure out what it is that the customer wants. You have to, if he wants to make A and you're creating B, that's not really helpful, is it? But of course, you're confident, and I bet that many of you are thinking, oh, I've been in this situation already, and I know what he wants, right? I know my customer, right? He wants experts in the field, and here we are. Of course, you, or better, your mind is being lazy, because this is the wrong answer. It's fooling you. It's urging you to take the path of least resistance. And why is that? Because you have insufficient perspective at that moment. And so the drawing that you see there, the 6 or the other person sees a 9, it's still the same system that you're inspecting, but it's a different view, right? And that's indeed what's really why you really need to talk to other people to have a different perspective. So what is really at play here? There is expertise bias from the DevOps people. So there is overconfidence effect. There is the ivory tower syndrome, and there is ego at play. And you have to be aware of those. Expertise bias, overconfidence effect, etc. That's when we fall into the trap of assuming that there is only truth. We only apply a singular mental model. We miss complexities and nuances that mask the possibility of finding better alternatives. And that deviates us from the first lean principle, define customer value. So how do you have to mitigate this? Your gut instinct, your experience, your hundreds of belts and certifications and mastery aside, you do not know what the customer wants. And they are the arbiter of the value, not you. So you have to replace your assumption with humility and exploration. You have to ask open questions, open-ended questions. You have to seek and gain an unbiased understanding and deeper insight in what your client explicitly wants and why. Never forget that clients are usually not experts. They also take the easy way out and often see the situation completely different than you do. So be very aware of what you do with defining customer value. Don't fall into the trap that you think that you know better solutions. That's not always true. Lean principle number 2 is mapping the value. So mapping the value, that means, say that your customer wants a car. How do you provide a car? So there is a belt that somehow, somewhere in your system that creates the car. It starts with plain material and it adds things on top of it so that eventually you will get a car. So this is the value stream. You might say the customer pays for the applications, and that's simple. The apps are the value and the developers create it. That's the value stream. But of course, again, this is an oversimplification. Our brains tend to act in our own self-interest to conserve cognitive energy. They are preferring fast answers over thinking things through. Often they are sabotaging our best intentions with their behavior impacting shortcuts. Consequently, what is your biggest impediment to implementing lean principles? It is yourself. So relying too much on your own perspective is thinking, I know how it works, I understand it. And that is related to the Dunning-Kruger effect, on which I'll explain something later. The curse of knowledge happens when the customer has access to more and better information over the situation and history thereof than you. And that results in a phenomenon known as information asymmetry, or curse of knowledge. He only gives you bits and pieces that he thinks are necessary to do the job, and you think that is everything that he gives you. He leaves out details and a lot of history that might be valuable to you, but alas, he doesn't share it immediately. Status quo thinking is if your customer cannot agree on how they currently operate. So how can they improve their future state? It's something along the lines of, suppose you work at BMW and BMW's biggest competitor is Mercedes. So the trap that you could fall into with status quo thinking is, okay, We just need to be better than Mercedes, and that's it. But what you fail to see, for example, is that the world is moving away from, let's say, the cars like we used to know. We get self-driving cars, we get electrical cars, we get, in California now, there is a new company that is starting up that is going to make electrical cars, 3-seaters, that actually have solar panels on top of the roof and that are self-sufficient almost. So status quo thinking is that you think that everything is going to be the same when you come up with a new solution. So that means that as long as the value stream, which you are going to map, is left implicit and not explicit on a drawing, then the steps, the order, the handoffs, the standards are highly subjective. As a result, effort will be duplicated and unnecessary work will take place. Bottlenecks and work starvation become business as usual, and no one seems to know this. The false consensus effect is when people assume that their personal qualities, characteristics, beliefs, actions are relatively widespread through the general population. Essentially, you're talking to your peers. You think you're talking to your peers while they might not understand you. And availability bias is, again, an effect of your mind that takes the recent information as coming with, let's say, high precedence over other information. And so the most of the opinions will be biased towards the latest news. So the only way to mitigate that is really put things on paper and visualize them. So even managers don't have a full overview. You have to eliminate assumptions and normalize expectations by making the current state explicit. You do that by visualizing the steps that are essential to the process. So you can see mismatches and that non-value added steps, or in lean terminology, are detected. So viewpoints. They generally have, let's say, promote alternative solutions. So you might be able to see them. How do you find viewpoints? You have to talk to others. You have to keep an open mind and you have to listen to understand. So the drawing that you see here on the right-hand side is in fact the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Some of you might already know this. It's really helpful because the 6 blind men are investigating an elephant and each of them sees a different part and they think that that particular part is the elephant. Of course, they're wrong. The elephant is the whole. It's not the different parts. So again, to highlight that you have to discover multiple viewpoints. How do you do that? You do that with a number of techniques: cognitive empathy, psychology, and more specifically, the understanding and sometimes applying biases. You have to use systems thinking. You have to see the whole, not the parts or details. You should be ready to use mental models. You can apply something like service design. And of course, not to forget theory of constraints. Okay, let's go over them one by one a little bit. Cognitive empathy is, in fact, trying to understand how your customer thinks, what he references, and what his perspectives are. So you first have to thoroughly listen to understand that person or that team that he represents. And you have to ask many open questions and listen. And when you do that often enough, you can start to imagine what he's really thinking, let's say, and how he would react in certain situations, what would be beneficial for him and what would not be beneficial for him. In other words, you get to know him quite intimately. Now, this requires a lot of practice, I know. And one of the things that help you in applying that practice is actually noticing when you're wrong about something. So I've given you a number of indicators for lack of empathy. So if you form opinions early on and you're defending them vigorously, or he is, then he's not really empathic. You really have to try to understand with a couple of why questions, for example, on what his intentions are. If you immediately start offering solutions, that might be helpful. But on the other hand, the first solution is almost never the best. So again, it's your mind at play that tries to bypass actually the deep thinking that is sometimes needed and proposes a solution that you recently heard of. Okay. If you find yourself in prolonged arguments, that might also be an indicator for not having enough cognitive empathy. You have to try to avoid discussions, I wouldn't say, but let's well, let me put it in another way. I once read a sentence that was really to the point here, that if you cannot change your mind, are you sure you have one? So during discussions, you should be able to change your mind about a number of things, and that's really key in this as well. And then another one would be blaming others for mistakes. That also is a big no-no. Usually it's a system that goes wrong. It's not one person that goes wrong. A typical example would be, for example, during World War II, at certain occasions, they noticed that the pilots, in fact, controlled the airplane. And so we're investigating how come they cannot control the airplane. They first blamed it, of course, on the pilots. But after a good investigation, they figured out that a number of switches were placed too close to each other. And incidentally, when flipping one, you could flip another one too, not notice it, and it would crash your plane. So it's the system that mostly is in fact to blame for mistakes and not the person who is using that system. Okay. Psychology, that is a huge terrain. So I took a picture from Google that showed the most important biases that you have. A bias is something that you typically don't know that you have, but that is indeed really there from psychological point of view. And it's quite important that you have an understanding of a few key biases. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, that is a very nice one. So take any subject and you'll see that a lot of people, if they know a little bit about it, then they simplistically think that it is easy. Anybody could do this. So I can drive a car. Surely a Formula One is a little bit better than my own car, but it can't be that hard, is it? So I can consider myself a Formula One driver. That is more like the extent to what they're thinking. They don't really notice that they only have a very, very limited understanding of how a Formula One car differs from a regular car. On the other hand, the more that you know about something, the more cautious you are. The more you think in possibilities. It could be this, it could be that, it could be such, it could be so, instead of just jumping to a conclusion. So the people that you meet, you have to be aware of it, and soon you'll notice, in fact, whether they are, let's say, the smart ones that hesitate, or they are, let's say, more in the other category, and they always think that it is easy. Yeah. So this is a situation that I often see with managers. They talk about a problem, and they say, well, I've been programming all my life, and I know that this is just 5 lines of change that you need to do somewhere. It can't be that hard, can it? While you keep on struggling with what you're trying to do. So a psychological bias, he doesn't know too much about the things he's talking about. Confirmation bias, on the other hand, is when you have a certain viewpoint, you are convinced of the fact that you're right about something, and you always typically read information that confirms your prior beliefs or values of that subject. So if you think that the earth is flat, then no matter how much evidence I try to give to you, you just forget about it, and you keep on reading articles that confirm the earth is flat. So that's a confirmation bias. There are lots of others in there too, and some are really useful to know. Really, really useful. One of the most important things, in fact, in investigating situations is systems thinking. Systems thinking is, let's say, it's not opposed to analytical thinking, but it enhances it. So on the right-hand side, in the middle, the yellow part, you see an engine. And the analytical thinking actually says, in order to understand the engine, I need to take it apart and see what it does. And then I can understand it. So you see cylinders, you see ignition, you'll see carburetors, or whatever. And that'll help you understand how things work. And if you don't understand, let's say, a carburetor, you can take it apart and see that it consists of a valve, and so on. So analytical thinking is about decomposing something. It's the same, actually, if you have, if somebody gives you a problem, a difficult problem, then the instinct that you have is to cut it into smaller problems. And you solve each problem separately. And then you will have solved the whole. This is usually what the thinking is. And that is incorrect. Because if you come up with, if you the problem in 100 pieces, then you have 100 different solutions that you need to bring together into one again. And that's where systems thinking is going to help you. So I've enlarged the slide so that you can see it better. Analytical thinking tells you or helps you in understanding how things work. Yeah, you can see the bits and pieces moving, and that tells you how things work. Systems thinking, on the other hand, takes a completely different view. So systems thinking says, okay, an engine. Of what is an engine a part? It can be a car. And if you combine it with a seat and with a driving axle and a couple of people, then you have a system that consists of an engine and other parts, and that can drive you from A to B. Or you can think about, let's say, a train or an airplane or whatever. Or it can be engine that drives some kind of let's say, electricity emergency unit. So you can see how actually thinking about an engine in systems thinking is changing your viewpoint as opposed to analytical thinking. If you're using systems thinking, then you're focusing on the why things work the way they do. A typical example is, in fact, suppose that I give you a car and use analytical thinking, and you can figure out what the car does. But with systems thinking, you can see that there is a difference between a left-handed car and a right-handed car. In analytical thinking, you will just see different parts that in fact do the same. But in systems thinking, it will help you to distinguish that there are countries where the steering side is on the left and where the steering side is on the right. That's the value of systems thinking. It helps you in synthesis. So in bringing things together, it helps you in creating oversights. It's one of the most valuable tools that you can ever have, in fact, knowing how to do systems thinking. And the complexity of things is not in how many parts do I have in an engine, but how many interactions between those parts do I have in an engine. So the more moving parts in any system, the more complex it is, because there is going to be multiple feedback and multiple steering. Okay. Now, mental models. That's also a good one. So, a quick story. Two young fish are swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way. The older fish nods and says, "Hey, good morning, boys. How's the water?" The two young fish smile, they nod, and they continue on their way. As they glide through the water in silence, eventually one of them turns around to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" So the point of this parable is, in fact, that the most obvious and important realities are often the most difficult to see. A mental model is an explanation how something works. The phrase mental model is an overarching term for any sort of concept, framework, or worldview that you carry around in your mind. They can be really simple. Mental models help you understand life. For example, supply and demand is a mental model that helps you understand how the economy works. Game theory, a mental model that helps you understand how relationships and trust work. Entropy is a mental model that helps you understand how disorder and decay work. There are lots of other mental models available also, but one of the most useful ones that I find is doing something with inversion. That is really quite simple. So let us analyze a little bit what I mean with success is overvalued, avoiding failure matters more. It sounds simple, but what it in fact is that you turn things around. When someone gives you a problem, you start to search for the best solution. While in fact, sometimes it's not the good way to go, and you're far better off by trying to avoid failures in bringing on a solution. So instead of, I know 10 different solutions for a specific problem, you're better in saying, look, we're going to use one of these solutions here, but we're going to avoid failure while implementing it. That is something that works far better than just picking the best one. You might choose the worst solution to your problem, but it's still better when you implement it by avoiding failure than going for the best one. Another mental model is, in fact, margin of safety. The Katrina hurricane from, let's say, something like 15 or 20 years back, Katrina was a huge storm that landed on Louisiana in the United States of America. And that was because a dam actually broke. One of the, let's say, guarding points against water that comes too high actually collapsed. And that's why Louisiana actually was flooded. So in other words, there was not enough margin of safety. So, for example, if another example would be if you're an engineer and you need to build a bridge for a number of cars that together weigh 80,000 tons, would you design it for 80,000 tons? Probably not. The margins of safety say that you need to design it for far larger loads, because coincidentally, of course, there can be more cars than anticipated, or there can be the winds in the valley that can really stress the bridge also, etc. So, and you can find other mental models here at James Clear mental models. Okay. Service design. Yes.
So you are still continuing and everything is fine, right? I just want to make sure about your stream and everything is going well.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. So, regarding service design, service design is in fact an approach that places equal value on the customer experience and the business process. And it tries to create quality customer experiences and service delivery. Okay, what does it all mean? In practice, I have applied service design, in fact, to figure out how certain teams work. A team is there for a reason, let's say. So it has some input, it does some things to that input, and it creates output, very briefly. And so I needed to see what, in fact, they were doing, because I was implementing a solution for the customer that would automate it to a large extent. But automating it required that I thoroughly understood what was happening. And that's where I used service design. So service design, you can see it as a kind of a matrix, but you see the colored lines here. Each color has its own, let's say, usage. And it's a very, once you're into the, let's say, practice of doing it, it really becomes easy. So notice that at the top row, you have black and white steps. So each row, in fact, each column is a step. A black step means that it is a contact point with the customer. A white step, the customer is not involved. And so here you see the service that this team provides consists out of a number of contacts with the customer, and then they do their own work happily. And each of the other colors, you might say, are indications of what's happening in that step. For example, do they use some kind of tool? How many requests per day do they have in that step? Is it something difficult? Yes or no? What are the metrics involved? So how do they measure what they are producing, etc. And so all of these little things actually line up and give you a nice overview of what's happening. And let's say that the red ones are the pain points in that specific step, and the yellow ones are the ideas that you have while discussing with them of what could be possibilities. And you can assign them later on in a separate section and put them next to each other and try to make something out of it. So practical service design is a really, really helpful tool that if you encounter, let's say, teams where you need to analyze what's being done exactly, that you can use this technique. For me, it showcased a number of let's say, things I wasn't aware of. So the thing that I was analyzing, they had an internal large number of steps, and I couldn't figure out at first why those large number of steps were needed, until they told me that the component that was going to be installed on a server, for which they were responsible for, needed to be paid extra by the client. So that means that they had to have a system that would help them in the invoicing. And that's where a lot of the complexity came from. And that because they were a purely technical team and everything was set up for just using a number of scripts in Perl. And that's it helped me in designing a system for them that was really valuable for the customer, because before we arrived, it took approximately 7 to 10 days to install a component on a system. And after we did our automation, it was less than half an hour. So it was a very valuable tool for us to get to know how that team worked. Okay, theory of constraints. A very good one also. See that the theory of constraints tells, in fact, that every system has one bottleneck, and that bottleneck actually is responsible for the throughput of the whole system. So a bottleneck, as you know, is something where things don't work out as well as in the rest of the system. And when you're optimizing a system or when you're designing a system, you have to figure out where is the bottleneck. So here in this drawing, it's obvious, of course, that the bottleneck is in the middle of the tube. Now, the theory of constraints actually says that that's the place where you can make a difference. So if you improve at the very beginning of the tube, it doesn't matter, because the bottleneck will still dictate how much outflow you get. And if you optimize after the bottleneck, then also it doesn't matter, because the bottleneck is still the bottleneck. It controls the outflow. So you have to optimize at the point of the bottleneck. You have to figure out which is the complete system and which is the bottleneck that we need to attack, and how can you find the bottleneck. That's sometimes difficult to know. But if I go back, let's say in one slide here. So consider this a system that we go from the first black block to the last black block. That is a pipeline. And one of these steps is indeed the bottleneck. So how can you figure out the bottleneck in that? Well, you have to do flow analysis. That means flow analysis is a technical term, but it means how much input does each step have and how much output is generated. So if you have, for example, an input of 10 and an output of 8, then it's almost in balance, you might say. But if you have an input of 10 and you have an output of 3, that is not in balance. And how can you see what's happening at, how can you identify bottleneck? Well, if the rest of the system keeps on feeding your input at the ratio of 10 and your output is 3, then you will see queuing at the input. So visualize your queues and you will find your bottleneck. The larger the queue, the bigger the bottleneck. So that's quite simply said, the theory of constraints. It's a very useful mechanism in trying to understand how a system works and where you should optimize. So in reality, what I often see is that, say you have a pipeline of some kind, and people actually think, well, if I just make the input go faster, then probably it will benefit the whole pipeline. And if I do the same in the middle and in the output, then we have a good working pipeline. So this theory of constraints actually tells you it is futile, useless to optimize anywhere else besides at bottleneck. This especially is true if multiple teams are involved. So, or with a system of multiple steps, you have to find the step where the bottleneck occurs first and then optimize it. Otherwise, you're optimizing parts that don't matter. You will actually make things worse by optimizing at places where it's not needed. Okay. Some other useful tips and tools here. Visualization is one of the, let's say, key things that you will need to learn how to do. So Grady Booch, one of the big fathers of C++ actually, and object-oriented thinking, not so long ago on Twitter placed that if I can't draw it, I can't build it and I can't test it. So visualization is really key in mapping out the things that you're working on. Usually, if it is a large thing that you're working on, meaning with more complexity and more interactions with other tools, then it certainly pays to do visualizations. It doesn't have to be difficult. You can work with sticky fingers. You don't have to be a drawing artist. Not at all. And that is what this link is all about. So sharpen your visualization skills. It will be very beneficial for you. The next one is this one here, the sequencediagrams.org. It's a free website that actually helps you in creating sequence diagrams. Sequence diagrams are often quite useful when discussing interactions between different teams, because they typically go, let's say, I have to do this first and then you can interact in that way, and then the third team can come along and do this and that. So create it in the sequence diagram and make sure that everybody is aligned, that everybody is talking about the same picture and has the same viewpoint. Good. Then I recently found this one also. This is the original document documenting architectural decisions. And I can't remember where I actually picked it up. But I was not really happy with the way that we were doing architectural decisions in our team. I mean, we used the typical approach of you design something and you put the architectural decisions in there. Just more or less arbitrarily. While architectural decisions are in fact not a list, but often a tree, in the sense that one decision relies on another or replaces another. And this one is a very neat, concise way of working for doing architectural design in a team. It's really worthwhile. Another thing I found recently is the Google Cloud architectural diagrams. I think most of you know that Microsoft has Visio, a tool that is really often used to create UML or other designs or whatever. Google has created now its own visualization architectural diagrams tools, and it's available on the link. You of course cannot click on it, but if you just Google cloud architectural diagrams Google, then you will see the article, and you will see that everything is described there. It's really nice. And then last but not least, one of the things I also learned not too long ago is that regarding functional and non-functional requirements when you present a solution, it really helps a lot for the audience if you link them as solutions to problem descriptions. Let me elaborate a little bit on that one. When I write an architectural solution, I typically start out with a context of what is it that we're replacing or that we're enhancing, and what are the actual problems that we have with the system as is. And then later on, when I specify the functional and non-functional requirements, each of those requirements is linked to one or more problems. And that link is the solution, let's say. So it helps in clarifying why you are setting up a certain solution, and which problems it helps to remove. Maybe not all of them, but to a large extent. That is also really helpful. Okay, I've gone over the complete presentation. If there are any questions now, then I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Hello, Marc, again. Thank you so much for your really informational presentation. Excuse me. And we don't have, I guess, any question right now, because I'm looking and just people are saying thank you for this really useful presentation in the YouTube chat. That's what I see.
Okay, yeah.
We can wait for a while, and then if we didn't still get any question from our viewers, we can end for this lovely live stream, actually.
Well, if it how should I say, I can extract most of the pointers and, let's say, make a quick overview of the presentation and put it somewhere available as notes in the community website, so that people actually can refer to it.
Exactly, it will be fine. And also we can put the website, and we can share the links or maybe we can add to the comment below at the YouTube, and also, after the live stream, the YouTube video will be available immediately
Yep.
for watch later. And that's it. Okay. I'm also checking right now about how we can do the presentation file. Okay, we can talk about the presentation file, Mark, and right now we don't have any question still yet. And
Yep.
for a
Yeah.
DevOps Turkey team, we are really thankful to you about this presentation again.
Yeah, it's well, it's far from the technical world. I said it at the very beginning, but it helps in interacting with people and interacting with teams, and yeah, it's been
it's maybe not more technical, but it's really about the thinking and communicating with other teams, and how you can do find a suitable way to do your tasks or your job example. So it was really nice.
Okay, glad you enjoyed it.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Hope to see you again, and we will arrange again or maybe for other presentation.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.